10:50 a.m., October 25th, 1944, the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Commander Yukio Seki is falling from the sky. He is 23 years old. He is an elite pilot, and he is carrying a 250-kilogram bomb that he has no intention of dropping. On the deck of the USS St. American sailors freeze. They have seen planes shot down before. They have seen crashes, but they have never seen this. This plane isn't trying to escape. It isn't trying to dogfight. It is becoming the weapon itself. History calls him a fanatic, a brainwashed zealot dying for his emperor. But history is wrong. Just days before climbing into that cockpit, Seki told a reporter, "Japan's future is bleak if it is forced to kill one of its best pilots like me. I am not going for the emperor. I am going because I was ordered to." He didn't want to die. He had just gotten married. He wanted to live. So why did he do it? How does a rational, intelligent human being cross the psychological line between soldier and suicide weapon? To understand the suicide tactic, you have to understand the smell of defeat. By late 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy wasn't just losing, it was evaporating. Months earlier, at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan had lost over 400 aircraft in a single day. The Americans called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. Enter Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi. When he arrived in Manila on October 17, 1944, to take command of the First Air Fleet, he didn't find a fleet. He found a graveyard. He had less than 40 operational aircraft to defend the entire Philippines against the massive American invasion fleet gathering at Leyte Gulf. The math was impossible. The American fleet had hundreds of ships, thousands of planes, and the proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells that made conventional bombing runs suicidal, but without the guarantee of a hit. On October 19th, Onishi drove to Mabalacat Airfield. He gathered his staff. The room was heavy with sweat and fear. He knew that the Shogo Plan, the defense of the Philippines, relied on the Japanese surface fleet, the battleships Yamato and Musashi, reaching Leyte Gulf. But the American carriers stood in the way. If the U.S. carrier decks remained operational, their bombers would sink the Japanese battleships before they ever fired a gun. Onishi needed to neutralize those flight decks. But how do you sink an aircraft carrier with 30 broken planes and rookie pilots who can barely land, let alone aim a bomb? Onishi spoke. "I don't think there is any other way to carry out the operation than to put a 250-kilogram bomb on a Zero and crash it into a U.S. carrier to disable it for a week." Silence filled the room. This was a violation of every tenet of aerial warfare. Pilots are trained to survive, to fight another day. But conventional logic had died in the Marianas. Desperation had taken its place. They didn't call it suicide. They called it Tokubetsu Kogekitai, the Special Attack Unit. They needed a leader, someone who wasn't just a body to throw at a ship, but a symbol. They found Lieutenant Yukio Seki. Seki was not the stereotype of a robotic killer. He was a graduate of the Etajima Naval Academy. He was an intellectual, and crucially, he was a newlywed. He had married a woman named Mariko just months before deploying. The night of October 19th, Commander Tamai, the executive officer, approached Seki in the mess hall. He tapped him on the shoulder. "Seki, come with me." in a small, dimly lit room. Tamai laid out the plan. He told Seki that Admiral Onishi himself had proposed a crash dive attack. He asked Seki to lead the first unit. But here is the detail that most history books gloss over. Seki did not say yes immediately. According to witnesses, he closed his eyes. He leaned his head forward, resting it in his hands. He stayed like that for seconds that felt like hours. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. What was he thinking about? Was he weighing his duty against his life? Was he saying goodbye to Mariko in his mind? The pressure was immense. In Imperial Japan, you did not refuse an honor like this. But Seki was struggling. Finally, he lifted his head, he smoothed back his hair, and said calmly, "Please appoint me to the post." The die was cast, but the bitterness remained. Days later, waiting for the weather to clear, Seki spoke to war correspondent Masashi Onoda. This conversation is the only window we have into his true soul. He was angry. He knew it was a waste of his skill. He knew it was a tactical admission of defeat. And then he whispered the words that haunt this story to this day. I am going to die for my beloved. I am going to die so that the Americans do not conquer the Philippines and harm her. I am dying for my beloved. It wasn't ideology. It was love. A twisted, desperate, tragic form of protection. He chose death because he believed it was the only way to save the life of the person he loved. The unit was named Shikishima, a poetic name for Japan. The other subunits were named Yamato, Asahi, and Yamazakura. Together, the names formed a patriotic poem. But poetry couldn't stop the rain. For days, bad weather grounded the planes. This was the cruelest torture. The pilots had accepted their death, written their last letters, packed their belongings, and then they had to wait. Imagine waking up every morning thinking, "Today is the day I die," only to be told, "Not yet, maybe tomorrow." The tension in the barracks was suffocating. They wrote letters. They cut off locks of their hair and fingernails to leave behind in small wooden boxes, the only parts of them that would return home. Finally, on the morning of October 25th, the weather cleared. The ritual began. Admiral Onishi poured a ceremonial cup of water, sometimes sake, for each pilot. He bowed to them, a vice admiral bowing to lieutenants. He told them, "You are already gods, without earthly desires. But one thing you cannot know is the result of your own crash. I will watch your efforts and report them to the throne. Go." At 07:25 a.m., 50 fighters, each carrying a 250-kilogram bomb, roared down the runway at Mabalacat.
They were escorted by 4 other planes, whose job was to verify the results. They climbed into the blue sky and turned east, toward Leyte Gulf, toward the American fleet.
In Leyte Gulf, the American escort carrier unit known as Taffy 3 was already battered. They had just survived a massive surface engagement with Japanese battleships earlier that morning, the battle off Samar. The crews were exhausted. They thought the fight was over. They were wrong. 10:45 a.m. Radar picks up low-flying bogies. The combat air patrol is out of position. The anti-aircraft gunners on the USS St. USS White Plains, and USS Kit Kun Bay scrambled to their stations. Usually, attacking planes drop their ordnance and pull up. The sailors on the Kit Kun Bay saw the first Zero dive. They waited for the bomb to drop. It didn't. The plane kept coming. It smashed into the catwalk, exploding into the sea. The sailors were confused. Was the pilot wounded? Was his control stick jammed? Then came Lieutenant Seki. He targeted the USS St. He didn't come in a steep, blind dive. He flew with the precision of the ace he was. He leveled out, banking slightly to ensure he wouldn't miss. Captain McKenna of the St. watched the plane approaching. He later recalled the surreal nature of the moment. The plane was trailing smoke, but it was steady. Seki crashed through the flight deck and his bomb detonated inside the hangar deck below. The result was catastrophic. The hangar was full of fueled planes and torpedoes. Secondary explosions ripped the St. apart. Within 30 minutes, the USS St. was gone, sunk beneath the waves. The first major warship sunk by a deliberate suicide attack. Back at the Japanese base, the escort pilots returned. They reported the success. The base erupted in cheers. Admiral Onishi cried. He knew what this meant. It worked. The tactic worked. The sinking of the St. was a tactical victory, but a strategic curse. If Seki had failed, perhaps the Kamikaze program would have been scrapped. But because he succeeded, because one plane and one life could trade for an aircraft carrier, the Japanese High Command became intoxicated with the efficiency of death. Pandora's box was open. Over the next 10 months, nearly 4,000 Japanese pilots would follow Seki into the abyss. They sank or damaged over 400 Allied ships. It was the most terrifying anti-ship tactic in history. And what of Yukio Seki? His ashes, or what little remained of him, were sent home to Mariko. He became a national hero, a god of war. But he died with a broken heart, not a fanatical one. Admiral Onishi, the architect of the Kamikaze, lived to see the surrender of Japan. On August 16, 1945, the day after the war ended, Onishi committed ritual suicide. He left a note apologizing to the souls of the pilots he had sent to their deaths. He refused a second assistant to cut off his head, choosing to die in agony over 15 hours as penance. Today, the word kamikaze is often used casually. It's a metaphor for reckless behavior. But we must remember the reality of October 25, 1944. It wasn't about hate. It wasn't about madness. For men like Yukio Seki, it was a tragedy of impossible choices. A moment where the machinery of war crushed the human spirit, forcing good men to do unthinkable things in the name of love and duty. They chose to die, but we must never forget why. If you want to understand the ship Seki was trying to protect, click here to watch our documentary on the battleship Musashi. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest corners of history.